They laughed when she spilled coffee on the colonel's boots. For 8 years, Rachel Elridge was nothing more than the janitor's daughter. Silent, overlooked, and stepped on. No one knew she had once flown faster than sound, trained in secret, and passed elite cadet tests others failed. But when every pilot backed out of a critical mission, they forced her into the cockpit. What happened next silenced the entire base and exposed the secret she was never meant to reveal. Before we dive in, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. Now, let's begin. Rachel Elridge was 19 when she first touched the flight controls of an abandoned simulator buried beneath Hangar 7. She found it by accident while sweeping the lower maintenance wing at midnight. The screen was flickering. The oxygen mask still hung from its hook. It had been years since any cadet trained there. Something inside her clicked. She shut the door behind her, sat down, and started flying. No one noticed. Her mother, Susan Elridge, had worked janitorial shifts at Graham Air Base for over 15 years. Rachel grew up on base. She learned to walk beside jet fuel tanks, took her first steps across oil-stained hangar floors, and memorized call signs before she could spell her own name. Her father had died in a lumber mill accident in Kentucky when she was 5. After that, the Air Force Base became her second parent. By 16, Rachel had studied every manual she could find, most torn, coffee-stained, or tossed into trash bins. She took pictures, printed them at the library, and read them late at night while her mother rested her aching knees. Her favorite was a weathered Air Force flight training guide with faded ink. It had a ripped corner on page 217, the one describing emergency dive maneuvers. She memorized it like a prayer. Rachel never told anyone. The airmen ignored her. The officers didn't speak to her. She didn't need their approval. She trained in silence, using discarded uniforms to mimic cockpit movement, practicing commands in the dark with a toothbrush as a control stick. When the simulator broke, she paid a mechanic, Roger Collins, a grumpy man with a soft spot for Susan, to fix it. He never asked questions. She aced every simulation, scored higher than average on mock tests she recreated from overheard training sessions. She even timed herself against real cadet exercises, listening through thin metal walls as they stumbled through drills she could execute in seconds. But no one knew. No one asked. To them, she was just Rachel, the janitor's daughter with oil on her sleeves and a name no one remembered. Hold on, can you imagine mastering a jet in secret while everyone thinks you're just cleaning floors? Rachel kept her secret buried beneath silence, grease, and humility. Every day at Graham Air Base, she pushed a mop down corridors where flight legends walked. She emptied trash bins beside briefing rooms where missions were planned, all while pretending she couldn't fly those jets herself. She never flinched when officers tossed paper cups near her feet. She never spoke unless asked. But inside her mind, she was always flying. Sometimes, when no one was around, she stood on the tarmac alone and looked up. She watched jets tear through the sky, imagining herself in the cockpit, fingers steady on the stick, breath even, mind sharper than steel. She whispered flight checklists under her breath, reciting them so often they became part of her heartbeat. No one noticed. That's exactly how she wanted it. In a world where she had no permission to belong, her silence was her shield. One evening, as the sun painted the sky orange and copper, Rachel was finishing her shift when alarms blared. The sirens were different, urgent, sharp, repeating faster than she'd ever heard. Officers ran across the runway. Crewmen shouted into radios. Commanders stormed from buildings. Rachel stood frozen, holding her mop, as a voice crackled over the loudspeakers, "Unidentified aircraft breach detected. All available pilots report to Hangar 1 immediately. Repeat, this is not a drill." Within minutes, Graham Base descended into chaos. Rachel ducked into the shadows behind oil drums as pilots sprinted past. Something was wrong. She knew that tone in the commander's voice, not panic, but fear. From her hiding spot, she saw General Vaughn step out of the operations center, pale. 2 lieutenants spoke quickly in his ear. She caught one phrase, "We don't have anyone left with the reflexes for that altitude." Every pilot failed the sim. Her heart dropped. Rachel's mind raced. She knew the sim they meant an altitude drop interception, so dangerous it was pulled from training after 2 accidents. She'd trained on it hundreds of times in secret, never crashing once. Suddenly, officers turned toward the maintenance corridor. Rachel ducked, heart pounding. She wasn't supposed to be here, not part of this world, but her instincts screamed otherwise. Then she heard her name. "Is that Elridge's girl?" one voice asked. Another replied, "The janitor's daughter? Why's she near the command line?" Before she could step back, a hand landed on her shoulder. It was Major Collins, the man who'd helped fix the simulator. He looked into her eyes, confused, and asked, "You know that maneuver, don't you?" Rachel couldn't speak. He shouted to a nearby officer, "Bring her now." And just like that, everything changed. Rachel's feet barely touched the ground as 2 officers flanked her, guiding her across the tarmac. Her boots, still damp from mop water, squeaked with every step. Base personnel stared. Some whispered, others laughed under their breath. She caught words like, "Janitor, what's she doing here?" and "must be a mistake." But the urgency was too thick for anyone to stop her. The hangar doors opened, and the sight hit like a punch. A jet stood prepped, engines roaring like monsters. Top brass moved in panic. General Vaughn stood in the center, face carved with tension. When he saw Rachel, his eyebrows lifted in disbelief. "You brought the janitor's daughter," he barked. "She knows the sim." "Ask Collins," an officer replied. Vaughn turned to Collins. "Are you serious?" Collins didn't hesitate. "Sir, she's flown that maneuver more times than anyone on this base, and she's never failed. She hasn't even enlisted. No one else has the reaction time." Vaughn stared at Rachel, trying to decode her. Finally, he asked, "What do you know about Operation Throttleback?" Rachel looked him dead in the eye. "High-altitude breach, triple-axis drop, double-spin restabilization. You lose hydraulic control at 56,000 feet. You only get one chance." Silence. Someone dropped a wrench. Vaughn waved toward the jet. "Suit her up." Rachel was pulled to the locker room. A jumpsuit, too large, was thrown into her hands. She zipped it anyway. A helmet followed. She strapped it tight, fingers shaking not from fear, but from the moment she knew would come. 8 years of hiding were over. When she emerged, the entire base watched. Officers lined up near the control tower. Pilots stood still, jaws clenched, arms crossed. No one spoke. As she walked toward the jet, Rachel felt every stare burning into her back. But her mind stayed calm, focused. Every checklist, sequence, angle, breath, it clicked into place. She climbed the ladder. For the first time, not in simulation, not in silence, she entered a real cockpit. The moment her fingers touched the throttle, her breath slowed. Everything else vanished. The weight of every insult, laugh, and ignored moment lifted. Inside that jet, Rachel wasn't a janitor's daughter. She was a pilot. She started her pre-flight check, each motion flawless. The ground crew stepped back. The hangar vibrated as the engines revved to full power. A voice came over the radio, "Elridge, confirm readiness." She pressed the call button. "Ready for takeoff." And the base held its breath. Rachel pushed the throttle forward. The jet shot down the runway like a bullet. The roar of the engines drowned out every doubter who'd laughed at her. Inside the cockpit, the world slowed. Her heartbeat synced with the instruments. Her hands moved without hesitation. Altitude numbers rose. The sky opened like a stage, waiting for her return. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't pretend. Rachel Elridge was flying for real. From the control tower, all eyes locked on her flight path. General Vaughn leaned in, jaw tight, watching as she climbed to 30,000 feet in record time. Even seasoned pilots had never seen movement that sharp. Rachel flipped switches, adjusted flaps, and checked wind resistance faster than the radar could catch up. Then came the voice on the comms, "Elridge, we have breach confirmation." Unidentified aircraft entering restricted airspace at high velocity. Intercept required. Caution. This may be hostile. Rachel clicked her comm copy that. Engaging. Below her, the desert stretched endlessly. The sun dipped, casting long shadows across the ridgelines, but her focus stayed forward. The target blinked onto her radar, small, fast, weaving at a speed few pilots could pursue. Rachel didn't hesitate. She angled hard, pulling a G-force turn that should have rattled most rookies unconscious. Her body stayed steady. Down at Graham Base, silence dominated the room. Officers who'd mocked her stood frozen. Susan Elridge arrived behind the glass, trembling, holding a rag she'd forgotten to set down. Her daughter, the girl who mopped floors, was now trusted with the nation's skies. Rachel hit 48,000 feet when the breach aircraft zigzagged to disorient her. But she'd trained for this in the simulator, predicting its movements before they happened. She locked on within seconds. Target in sight. Preparing to match dive angle, she spoke into the mic. Her jet spun downward at a sharp incline, almost vertical. The cockpit rattled. Alarms screamed. Altitude dropped like falling bricks. Any mistake would be fatal. But Rachel's grip never loosened. She engaged the emergency counterthrust manually, pulled stabilizers mid-dive, and shifted power between engines with perfect precision. Inside the tower, a young pilot muttered, "No one's supposed to be able to do that." She reached 12,000 feet. The enemy aircraft pulled up hard. Rachel followed. The two jets climbed in tandem, slicing the sky open. In one motion, she flipped her jet, performed a counterloop, and landed behind the target's tail within 3 seconds. Lock-on confirmed. Target neutralized, returning to base. She clicked off the comms. The tower erupted. Officers shouted. Applause broke out. People ran toward the runway. Some laughed in disbelief. Others cried. But Rachel said nothing. She landed smooth, even, steady. The moment her wheels touched the ground, a rush of realization swept through Graham Air Base. Rachel Elridge had done the impossible. She climbed down from the cockpit. Her boots hit the concrete. The crowd stood still, waiting for her to speak. But Rachel only looked at the ground, then up at her mother. Susan was crying, covering her mouth. General Vaughn approached, stopped a few feet away, and said, "You were never just a janitor's daughter, were you?" Rachel wiped sweat from her brow. "No, sir." For the first time in 8 years, the base saw the truth. The tarmac had never been this silent. The engines had quieted. The sun had disappeared below the horizon. In that fading orange light, Rachel Elridge stood still, sweat dripping, boots planted firmly on the runway, every soul at Graham Air Base staring at her like they were seeing a ghost. Or maybe a legend. A staff sergeant who once told her to clean the men's restroom stepped forward. His voice cracked. "Ma'am, do you need water?" Rachel almost smiled, but looked past him. Her mother stood there, still holding that rag, still in the same faded uniform she'd worn for a decade. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the weight of every hidden truth, every silent sacrifice, every hour spent scrubbing tiles instead of flying, washed away. The general turned to the crowd. "Everyone, listen up." Silence again. This woman just executed the most dangerous high-altitude interception maneuver in our database. She wasn't supposed to survive that, not without years of training, not without official flight hours. But she did it perfectly, and you all watched it happen. He turned to Rachel. "Why hide this? Why work as a janitor for 8 years when you could have been flying?" Rachel looked around. "Because nobody asked. They looked at my mother's job and assumed mine would be the same. When I told people, they laughed, so I stopped telling them. 8 years ago, I passed every simulator test on this base without ever being given a real chance. I watched pilots get promoted because their last names carried weight. Mine didn't, so I stayed quiet. But I never stopped training." The base commander stepped forward. "Who trained you?" Rachel paused, then looked toward the control tower. Major Collins. He believed in me before anyone else did. He let me train in the simulators at night. He broke rules for me. I flew those programs when everyone was asleep. Collins nodded, eyes glassy. Susan Elridge walked across the tarmac, each step heavier than the last. When she reached her daughter, she dropped the rag and wrapped her arms around her. I never wanted you to carry my burden, Rachel. I wanted more for you, but you made the sky yours anyway. The general spoke again. Effective immediately, Rachel Elridge is no longer janitorial staff. She is offered full pilot status with rank, clearance, and a seat on the elite rapid response squadron. The base erupted in applause. Officers saluted. Mechanics who'd ignored her clapped. Pilots nodded in respect. Rachel looked across the faces, the same ones who never saw her before today, and said nothing. She raised her hand and gave a single sharp salute. She didn't need to say a word. She'd already spoken with steel wings, precision, and fire. And from that day forward, every person on that base remembered exactly where they were when the janitor's daughter took the sky and never came back.